Welcome back to In the Woods. We took a little bit of a hiatus, but we are back.
We are back. It's been a couple weeks.
Yes.
But I'm excited because we have a special guest today, Mr. Ken, Pastor Ken, who is our teaching pastor. And we've been trying to get you on the podcast for a while. Now, the last couple of weeks have been difficult, because obviously we haven't recorded because 2 weeks ago we had that whole thing where we found out the green M&Ms were still in your dressing room, and I understood your anger. But last week, having to call it off because the water wasn't Evian,
yes,
was a little tough. But we're through it.
My standards are high.
Everything's what it's supposed to be. Your handlers were okay for today, so we're back on. We're ready to go, and it's good to have you, man.
It's good to be here.
So here's what I want to do. As we've got this podcast going, we've taken time to get to know people who are on for the first time. You're not new to Woodland by any means, but just haven't had a chance to be on the podcast yet. So let's start here, just so people know, we can kind of get in a little bit more about who you are and things like that. But right now, as it stands, the role you're playing at Woodland and how you're kind of helping move forward, the role you're serving, help people who maybe don't know, understand, what you're currently doing for us for the church.
Yeah. So one of the primary functions is as a teaching pastor to help supplement your teaching and things like that. But primarily at Marshall, to help make sure that the Sundays are covered and that I'm continuing to teach, as that's what I love to do. And so there's an opportunity to help Woodland out in this time. And so happy to continue to do that. And I'm also helping with the leadership of the small groups here for this semester to just make sure that those are functioning and up and running, and that there's somebody that's kind of helping oversee that and a support to the leaders. Yeah. So that's primarily about twice a month. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. And so a lot of it, especially in this season, is going to be, like you said, more at Marshall campus. But one way that we'll kind of continue the bridge is trying to use this podcast. So even when we first started talking about it a couple months ago, I know people, if this podcast is something you follow regularly, you'll probably end up hearing a lot from Ken. So, but you're not new to Woodland. So even just sort of slowly taking a few steps back, when I got here, you were serving in a similar role, but more at the Battle Creek campus. How long were you serving as a teaching role here, and what sort of led to that? I don't quite know all the story.
So it actually goes back to 2021.
2020. Okay.
Yeah. When there was a leadership, challenge here at Woodland, and they were going through a transition. They needed somebody to come in and provide teaching. And I had just left Keystone in
Which
June.
is the church you were pastoring
I was at for 27 years.
Okay.
And we were living in Howell, Michigan, which is over by Brighton, and got the call to say, hey, we need somebody to come over and teach. And at the time I was just like, okay, given the transition, it was fairly traumatic. And I was like, all right, I want to be there, but if you're going to ask me to come and teach, I just don't want to pop in every once in a while. I'd like to be there consistently, to be a voice that brings some stabilization. Yeah. So the church was willing to do that. And that fit my style more than just kind of the drop-in teacher. I like to form relationships and things like that. So jumped on board and really was in the teaching role fairly regularly until February, when the new pastor came. And then a year and a half later, unfortunately, there was another transition. And that that's when I was called in 2023 and said, hey.
The third time you're stepping in for, at least
calling.
This time though, it's.
Yes. Yeah, this time's a little bit different in the sense that, I've already been at Marshall a few times and was able to teach there. And
Devin didn't leave in any circumstances that we would say were difficult so.
I mean, transition is challenging either way,
sure.
but this didn't have, the trauma associated with it in the same sense.
So, okay, let's take a step back further then. You said in 2021, you ended 26 years. So let's go back, what got you into ministry? How did you start in ministry? And then how'd that lead into this church Keystone? Who are you? Like in that show?
So I'm a pastor's kid. I'm a pastor's grandkid. I'm a pastor's great-grandkid.
Wow.
And so my great-grandfather was called into ministry really at the time he was converted. And prior to that, he had been an alcohol runner during Prohibition. He had been a fairly rough character. And God got a hold of his life and he stepped into ministry. My grandmother was his daughter. She stepped into ministry, married my grandfather. He was a pastor. And then my dad was the pastor of the church I grew up in. Okay. And so it's like
family business.
Yeah, it's a family business. And I was the fifth boy, and I was so excited for one of my brothers to be a pastor. And none of them originally stepped up to that call.
Passed down to
and so
you.
everybody kept asking, "Oh, so are you going to be the pastor?" And I was dead set against that. I was like, not that I didn't like the church, or I just was like, "No, it's not. That's not what I'm after." And went to Indiana Wesleyan to study history and music. And so when I got to campus, had a spiritual emphasis week, and one of the speakers was talking about the need for people to answer the call. And I knew it. We had this candle he gave us. It was going to be some part of the service. And like one of those little white candles for Christmas Eve. I was so convicted during the sermon as he was preaching.
This was back when you were younger, before we had electricity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's how we lit things.
Gotcha.
And I by the end of the service, I had formed that into a little square in my hands.
Because you were nervous?
Because I just knew what I was wrestling with, because I knew that God was leading me in that direction. I just was super resistant to it. And so at that point, I'm just like, all right, God, if this is what you're calling me to do, I'm better off doing what you want than what I want, because that's just going to be the way it is. And so that night, everything shifted, and a call to ministry was really confirmed. And I stepped into Christian ministries, eventually stopped. My history major, my music major disappeared, and I just
What were you wanting to do with your music major? Yeah, did you want to
I had some really great history. I had a really great history teacher in high school, and I have a mind for that. I love the study of history and things. And so I could do music, but I loved history. But I was afraid music, if I don't become a teacher, I want to have some flexibility here. So I was doing both, and I wanted to be a history professor. Like literally when I was looking at colleges.
Or a boy band, one or the other.
Yeah, I sang bass. I was never going to be a good boy band.
An educational boy band.
But I was wanting to be a professor. I mean, really, I so enjoyed my high school, and then my freshman year I went to community college, and I took a world civ class, and that history professor, it was just phenomenal. I just so enjoyed it, and so that was what I was aiming for. And so Indiana Wesleyan at the time, and still, they had a really strong humanities department in history. And so I was like, all right, I'll plug in there.
Okay.
So
you feel called to ministry. You get out of school, your undergrad, and did you jump straight into something, or
I wasn't a great student. I learned that really quick. Like when you grow up in the church and the Bible is kind of just what you do. When you have classes on the Bible, you tend to like slough it off because you already know so much. And so my grades did not reflect really well. So I was not jumping into seminary right away. Plus there's a people component to me, and the idea of being in school versus being in a congregation. The congregation just had a stronger pull.
Yeah.
And so I was looking, had some opportunities in Florida and some other places. Diane and I were kind of on the edge of dating. And so I did not want to be in Florida while she was in Indiana. So I was
she at Indiana Wesleyan?
She was in Indiana Wesleyan.
Okay.
As
Was she
a year
younger
behind
than
me.
you? Okay.
Yeah. And I was just like, all right, God, if you can give me something within a 5-hour drive of Indiana Wesleyan, I'd really appreciate that. And an opportunity came open. One of my professors, his son, was planning a church in Saline, and he recommended me to his son. And so his son called me. It was a church plant. They had no money. And he's just like, I can pay you part-time, but I can give you a lot of opportunity.
To do what?
To be an assistant pastor at this church. And I was like, yep, that's what I'm going to do. And God confirmed it. I grew up in the Philadelphia area, and I was in New Jersey, but the greater Philadelphia area. Going to school in Marion, Indiana was like culture shock.
So you just came to Indiana because of school?
Just because of school.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a culture shock in the middle of the cornfields, and just like wow. Ann Arbor, which is where this church plant was planted, felt way more like the place I grew up. And it was just like, it felt like home. And so I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And so served as an assistant for 12 years in a variety of roles, student ministry, worship, small groups, discipleship, all of it. And then became the lead pastor at the church because the guy who planted it stepped away. And then the church gave me the opportunity to take the lead role. And so I never felt like leading was like exactly what I wanted to do. But at the time, I really had been captured by a model for ministry, and a thing I wanted really was like, if I could lead a church, this is how I would lead it. And having 12 years of relational credit built up, the church was like, if this is what you feel called to do, we'll let you do it. And so I was able to then be the lead pastor for 15 years. And it was phenomenal. I mean, it was a great experience. It was that we spent 27 years in the same town.
As well.
It was insane.
Yeah.
Because I just never expected that.
So how far out of college did you guys get married? Did you wait a couple of years?
The next year.
Just 1 year? Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have children, I know.
Yeah, we have 3 boys.
Yeah.
Caleb, Isaac, and Eli.
Where are they all at?
So Caleb is down in Austin, North Austin. He works for the gaming industry. He's a video game tester. He's trying to break into design.
What's so strange about that is how often kids, it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to like test video games mattresses. That's not a real job. It's like, oh wait, it is.
now.
Literally fourth
Very
grade.
lucrative.
Fourth grade, he said this is what he wants to do.
Want
He
to
wants to work in
test
video games. And
Love that.
Diane and I used to tell him, like, that's not a job.
No one's going to pay you.
No one pays you to do that. And now they pay him to do it. So he's down there. And then Isaac married Caitlin. We have 2 granddaughters. And they live in Noblesville, which is about 50 minutes south of Marion, a suburb of Indianapolis. And then Eli just graduated from Indiana Wesleyan in the spring. Just got married to Betsy, and they actually live right in town in Marion because he's kind of taken a gap year to earn some money before he moves into seminary. Yeah. So
back to your story, you finish your time there. I think you and I have talked about this, but just for the podcast listeners, like talk a little bit about feeling like your time was ending as the lead pastor of Keystone and what you felt was next for you and where that leads you where you're currently at.
Yeah, so I finished a master's in 2013. And that was, from 2007 to 2013, I was doing kind of an online master's through Asbury Seminary. And it just sparked something in my brain, like that history that, oh, wait, there's more to this. And I realized how much I didn't know. And I just loved that whole experience. And when I got to the end of that, I was like, I definitely want to pursue a PhD. Like this whole thing of being a professor is like back on the table because now I have experience as a pastor.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, if I could help the next generation of pastors, that would be really cool. And you can do that in the local church, but it's a very limited number. And I'm like, what if I could do that in the university level? But at the time, we had sacrificed so much to get done the master's that it was like, I'll detonate my family if I decide to go for a doctorate right now. So we knew we had to wait. And I also knew there was stuff I wanted to do at Keystone. And then when we got to just before COVID hit, it really began to kind of weigh on me. Every year I would evaluate, all right, am I the one to lead it to the next thing? Because I'd sat in the non-senior pastor chair, non-lead pastor chair. And, it was one of those things where I came at it going, okay, this is a privilege, but it's for a time. I'm not going to be here when I'm 100 being the lead pastor. So when is this transition? And did I do what God called me to do here in order to go to the next thing? And so I really evaluated that. We did a retreat. We did some vision casting, and the church laid out the leadership and the staff and things like that laid out a vision for what the next 10 years could look like. And I loved it. It was like, yes, this is exactly what the church needs to be. But I'm never going to lead it there. Like it's just that gift mix. Like there are things I'd have to learn to do that, and I know me well enough to know I won't learn those things. Like you just get used to your own gifting, And I was like, that's going to take somebody else other than me. And so at that point, it began to kind of be like, okay, so what does transition look like? I always wanted to pursue a PhD. I know I can't do that and lead the church well because leadership isn't my number one gift anyway. And so we just began to talk about that. COVID delayed it because I wasn't going to leave my church in the middle of COVID. So I'm like, all right, we're going to put that on the back burner until we're through some of that COVID craziness. And then once we were fairly back on our feet and kind of moving through it, then it was like, okay, it's time.
Cool.
So,
and now you are essentially finishing up. You're in your dissertation phase, and you're an adjunct now at IWU.
Yep.
And just kind of waiting to see what God's going to do next with it. Right?
I just keep applying and see where God's going to open the doors. I mean, it's, the dissertation, probably about the 65% of it's written. So I'm just finishing the last few chapters to get that done, put that one to bed. So that one started in the fall of 2021. So it's going to be good to get it done.
Yeah.
And then we'll see once the PhD is in hand, as I apply for positions, I'm all but dissertation. And that's a different category than PhD.
Right.
And so it automatically kind of puts me in a different tier. So once I have a PhD, then I'm like, all right, it'll be a clear shot to say, okay, this is what I'm going to try to do. And hopefully that door opens. And I still am planning to be involved in the local church because I think to teach pastors being one is an important function. I want to have feet in both worlds. And so I still want to be involved, but I also would love to pour more time into the classroom space.
That's cool. Yeah, I just came out of it recently myself in the last few years. I was at a Christian college and teaching and stuff, and then God called me back into the church. So, as you were talking, I've lived my life in this space for the most part. But I have certainly, you connect and know so many people who don't live in the church world. And for a lot of people, it's changing in America because 50 years ago, you'd get out of college, you'd take a job with IBM and you'd retire with IBM. But that really isn't our world anymore. It's pretty common for people to have multiple careers or career shifts. But I think sometimes it is hard for people who don't live and work inside this church environment world to understand, like, why are pastors quitting? Where are they going? What's happening here? Aren't you? But it's in some ways there's a similarity in the sense of feeling called to different things and new things. And then, I think sometimes, like we're Wesleyans, and Wesleyans have a long history of like moving pastors much more quickly than even like some, there's a lot of times it's like a couple years, 3 years, move on to their church. I'm glad that we don't quite live in that space anymore, but it's normal for God to call us to new things. And so I'm sure it's scary, but exciting journey, and probably live it now.
It's never scary because it's like if you feel like God's calling you to do it, it's actually scary to stay still.
That's true.
And that part of it was like, because I didn't have to leave. There wasn't like, I didn't have any like backstage drama going on that I was trying to get out of. And, so it's like, no, this was going to have to be a call that, I really felt, all right, it's time, because I was leaving family too, 27 years in one place. This isn't just church members. These are family members. So when it was clear, it was clear. It wasn't. So the fear would have been, there could be a sin of lingering longer than I should have. And I did not want to be guilty of that.
Sure. Well, it's cool. God, in his timing, had you right where this church needed you.
Absolutely.
3 seasons now.
I know.
Absolutely.
It was, and Diane and I we were at the time when we came here, like you have 27 years. Like we knew we weren't going to replace that experience anyplace else. I wasn't going to live long enough to replace that. And I was just like, but when we came to Woodland, we actually were like, oh, this actually feels, because of our time, we just felt more connected. And it was sad stepping away. And so being invited back didn't feel weird at all. But the circumstances weren't great, but the people, I loved being back and loved being here. And so it really was a nice kind of match.
Yeah.
And after we moved to Marion, I mean, literally the month we moved there, I sent a letter to the dean of the School of Theology and Ministry saying, hey, I'm in the area. If you ever need somebody, love to be considered for an adjunct. And within the week, he got back to me and he's like, actually, I just had one of our faculty members is transitioning to a different role. And we have a class that needs to be filled this fall. Would you be willing to do it? So I had like a month to prepare for a class that I need to teach. But that got me started. Cool. And it was great because that first semester was the test. Did what I do on the platform for 27 years translate to the classroom? Because that was the only concern I had. Like, I know I can teach from a platform. Can I teach in a classroom with college students when they're now my kids' age? You know, are I going to be like an irrelevant dinosaur? And it was actually effective and fruitful, and I was loving it. So I'm like, good. All right, that confirms that part of it too.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I can see myself. I can see myself enjoying your class.
Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of professors are great filling information, and not all of them are great to sit and talk to or listen to. And that's something about you that I think if you were a professor, I'd want to take your class. So
we've loved being your students over the last several years. You just have such. I mean, we can see your passion for the historical side, and it's so fun. Like, I love your spark for the things that you love.
Yeah, the geek that rises up.
I love the geek of
the
Ken.
geek rises up.
Yeah, no.
And we
Amazing
kicked
teacher.
off a new series, and of course, it has a Star Wars theme.
Yes.
That was beautiful.
To honor you.
But yeah, we did. So this last week was kind of the first Sunday in a, I don't know, I don't want to say a new chapter. I don't know. But you know, for the last couple months, it's been this sort of like, we've been very upfront and vocal on this podcast, even with Devin's journey at the Marshall campus. And, you know, that chapter closed in his life, and, you know, had a few weeks of trying to, that's kind of why we haven't done a podcast last couple of weeks. It's just been a lot of crazy. This was the first weekend that it was like, okay, here's kind of the new flow, at least for this season, of having you here a lot more. And so we kicked off a new series. We kicked it off last week, but just actually ended up having some of you guys know, just a bit of a family emergency last week. But so here today, we're sort of our first podcast of this sort of, okay, this is kind of the new normal for at least a season of like, one of us at Battle Creek, one of us at Marshall, kind of sharing. And so we're in week 2 of the series, but the series, in case you haven't been with us last 2 weeks, is looking at the churches in Revelation, the first 2 chapters that address these real historical churches and talk to them about ways that they were doing well as a church, and then ways that maybe they might have been getting a little off course or off target. And so just looking at each week, how can we look at them and see what God might be saying to us as a church about staying on target and continuing to go where God's called us to go. But yeah, maybe like a place to start could be, because you and I both, and this is new for me in some ways. I worked at a church for a while where we had multiple campuses and everyone preached our messages. What I didn't do, because it wasn't really even a thing, like the idea of like coming together on a Monday and talking to a podcast about what'd you talk about? Yeah. But I am kind of like, it's interesting because we do each, here's sort of a template, here's a few pointers, maybe even more with some of this series than other times, but like maybe just for people that are listening to the podcast that attended Battle Creek, could you start by saying like kind of where'd you take it? And like if you were going to summarize what you did yesterday and how you approached the message.
Yeah. So when we started the series, we read chapter 1 and then I dove into the Ephesus letter. So obviously we're on Smyrna this week, and I have been there. So that was kind of fun to be able to talk about, you know, the city itself. So where I started was actually with Polycarp. I started with what you ended with.
Okay, cool.
It's just like, because I wanted to let them know, you know, first I talked about the city, how they loved Rome. You know, they were one of the first cities in Asia Minor to build a temple with Roma, the god, to worship Rome. I mean, this is a devoted city. And so I just kind of set that up and talked about the tension that created, because around the time this letter was sent to Smyrna, Domitian had a law that you had to worship the emperor or you would die.
Yeah.
And so like the pressure in that community at that time was really high. And then I went into the story of Polycarp, because he's a guy that probably born in 69 AD. He was a young man in the
Yeah.
Church of Smyrna, possibly a leader within the Church of Smyrna when that letter arrived.
Right.
Could very well have been the person who read it to the congregation.
Yeah.
And then you have 60 years later, finally he
Has to face
has
it.
to face it. And it's like, how did he face it? How did he have that courage? And I nearly read the same things
Did
you
you?
did. It was crazy. I mean, it's
That's
like,
right. We didn't talk about that at all.
not at all.
No.
No, but I'm like, well, how can you, Polycarp's from Smyrna. How
Yeah.
could I not say it? But then it's like, how did he have the courage?
Real quick, sorry. Polycarp was the bishop of the city
yes.
who was martyred
Yes.
in 155. Just
Yeah,
so
about-
people,
yeah, yeah.
hopefully you were, sorry, go on.
Watch the messages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Go to church, even. Sorry.
We'll need to explain it.
But that was the thing. It's like, you know, what gave him that resilience was he was predisposed to this message 60 years earlier.
Yeah.
When he was being formed as a Christian. And I'm like, so then I read the letter and just said, okay, this is what Jesus is trying to say. And one of the things that I did that was a little bit different is, you know, the first and the last. Jesus calls himself the first and the last. I was dead and I'm alive again, or living forever. The first and the last is actually in the first chapter. So it's a callback. Every letter actually in the letters to the churches calls back to the first chapter.
Right.
It's the prelude. But first and last is also something you find in the book of Isaiah. And the difference, I think, is significance, because Isaiah 48, God calls himself the first and the last. But the prophecy is about the judgment that Israel's facing because of their disobedience. And the flip side is when God calls himself the first and the last to the church in Smyrna, they're going to face judgment because of their faithfulness.
Rather than their unfaithfulness to Israel.
Like and these are not incompatible things that
Interesting.
God wants them to know. It's not that you did anything wrong, because he mentions nothing wrong
Right.
in that letter. But he does say you're going to face persecution. And I'm like, understand, this isn't a judgment on you, but it's your faithfulness that's actually going to drive this persecution. Stay faithful.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I lived with it a little bit. And then as, you know, kind of walking through it and talking about, you know, you're going to face, in the NIV, I think it says afflictions.
Your afflictions and poverty.
Yeah, and it's the word tribulation. And, you know, I think you and I have a similar thought on this, is we don't get to escape tribulation. You know, like tribulation, that happened in Smyrna. They lived that. I mean, with the next 60 years, it got proven they're going to live that.
And people are still living it.
Absolutely,
around
all around the world. The church doesn't get to escape tribulation. We have an anchor within it, and that's Christ. And so that's kind of where I wanted people to understand. It was kind of heavy in the sense of this is the reality. And then, but I also took them to, you know, I shared about don't mislabel things persecution that aren't, because we tend to do that in our culture.
Yeah.
You know, we're somebody called it, we're a little bit over dramatic about it. And I said, you know, go into the coffee shop and having somebody not wish you Merry Christmas this holiday is not persecution. It might be annoying and it may not be great marketing, but it's not persecution.
Right.
But there are persecutions that people face, even in North America, even within families. Sure. And so I basically took them to, all right, that's going to be true. Some of us, I don't want to diminish some of that happens, even though it's not the extreme of death, martyrdom. There's still some people whose spouses do not treat them well because of their faith. Their workplaces may be difficult, school, all these places. And I went to the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is like, blessed are you when people say all things about you, like when they ridicule you, when they persecute you, because he actually includes persecution along with slander and with being kind of verbally abused or accused of things. And his response is, you don't return that, but you pray for them and you bless them. It's like there's a counter to this, but it isn't what we think.
Yeah.
And it was not, I didn't put it in the same words that you did, but it was the same idea.
I actually had, I had two, like sometimes I like to make a point and then look at multiple passages that build on it. So I was making the point and I had two. I started with Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. And then I went to Peter saying, essentially, Jesus didn't return insult for insult. And when I finished, my message was too long, and I had to go back and cut. And so I cut Matthew 5 out. I just stuck with Peter.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, we went to a lot of different places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's the very thing. The Smyrna letter talks about slander, and Jesus talks about when people speak ill of you and things like that. I mean, these, and Peter does the same thing. Well, yeah, he's a disciple of Jesus. He's going to carry that same message forward.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, where it landed was just, the whole thing. The when you go to the first and last comment in chapter 1, it begins with Jesus says, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last." And then in the letter to Smyrna, "I'm the first and the last." And then he says in verse 10, "Do not be afraid."
Yeah.
So it's this message of don't be afraid, be faithful. That's what we're called to. And it can be easy to get trapped in fears, but we're called to be faithful even though we have fear, because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's overcoming it.
Yeah.
And I told him, actually, fear is a necessary ingredient for courage, because you wouldn't be courageous otherwise.
Right.
And so, yeah, you overcome that fear. And then I put a call out to pray for the persecuted church, because we what we call persecution is fairly minor compared to our brothers and sisters in Christ in a lot of places in the world.
I wonder if maybe there's always a danger of whenever we record things and put them on the internet, it's like, is that heard right? But this is an interesting point for me that I'm curious about, even generationally. So like, I'll kind of like build it up and then lead into like a discussion question here. The sense, let's just call it a sense or a belief or a feeling that America is getting away from us. And by us, the word us would be like Christians. Like, it used to be a Christian nation, it's not anymore. What's interesting about that whole idea, twofold. Number one, people who are maybe in like the current, like the boomer generation, have a sense about an America that Xers like me don't even necessarily have, and I don't think millennials and definitely Gen Zs don't have, about like not growing up in a world where, they grew up in a different world. And so maybe there isn't as much of a, hey, we got to get this back, for people that like, people might feel something as persecution because it felt different 50 years ago, that a 30-year-old is like, this is all I've known. But also, sorry, I know I'm rambling, but this is what I preached yesterday was actually the roots, or essentially like the foundation of a message I gave 2 years ago. So, and that was intentional. When I'd planned the series, I knew I wanted to put this in here. When I wrote some of what I wrote 2 years ago, Biden was president, and I remember, because it jogged a bunch of memories. Biden had just declared, I think, Easter Sunday like Transgender Day or something like that. And so even since I wrote some of those thoughts down and preached a message like this 2 years ago, the world has changed already. And Trump's back in office where we're recording this. And it's like a lot of that stuff is undone. And some of the things people were screaming about 2 years ago are already, like, some of the cancel culture stuff is sort of like swung, and like the modern zeitgeist that 2 years ago was so pro, everything transgenderism, now feels like it's kind of the pendulum's going back the other way. It's just so interesting, because even things that we were talking about 2 years ago felt irrelevant. And I'm like, well, I don't talk about that. Some of the things like our government's turning against us is like, is it? Because it might actually be coming back in our face. I don't know. Yeah. So all that being said, it's just very confusing. I think one thing I'm curious about is, Ken, you and I are both further along in the journey of life. Sarah, I wonder like how you perceive or think of, and you don't have to be like critical or negative, just your perspective. You literally grew up, your childhood was at a different America than my childhood, and a different America than I think even Ken's, in the sense of how the culture and maybe the government viewed and treated or talked about Christianity. It's shifted a lot in 40 or 50 years. I'm just wondering how you perceive even some of our reactions. And I don't mean to be like, oh, okay, boomer kind of stuff, but in a sense, like, do you wrestle with like how sometimes maybe older people might perceive things as persecution or suffering when you're sort of like, I don't know, that's just the world? Or do you see it as, no, I feel it being worse now? It's a very vague question, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, someone who's slightly younger, when you look at that stuff.
No, I've tried to kind of make my own opinion about that, just even through observation myself. And you do just realize that, I mean, ultimately, is it us truly swinging back and forth between, being Christian, not being Christian, or is it just whatever sells the campaign of the day, So I'm seeing that as well. Like, okay, yes, the name of Christ is being spoken or dropped, but
it's getting votes.
It's getting votes as well, which there's scripture about. If it's being preached, it's being preached. I don't know. As for if it's worse or better, from what I would consider the old days for my 30 years of life, like, we didn't have the access to hear everybody's opinion all the time. It was a much quieter world. Like, I think I was on the cusp of right before we entered into just information overload. Social media was still fun when I got on. We were just poking each other on Facebook.
You're probably like in middle school when the iPhone came out, right? Early high school.
Yeah, about then. So, I mean, I don't see a difference in, like, man, people were so different back then. I'm like, well, they just now have a safe space to be anonymous and share their mind in a different way than before, So I don't know. I don't necessarily see us as being different, or I guess I see. You were asking about the reactions. Like, does it seem overblown when it comes to, like,
or just
being
like,
persecuted?
is it hard to understand how an older generation maybe reacts a bit harder, knowing that they knew something different than maybe you don't know?
No, not at all.
No, okay.
No, I mean, I
sense
think, like you said, things change so fast. Like, even the different topics that would have been relevant in 2020, we have swung, be it authentic or for votes, to
But
different
swung,
philosophies
it's
or whatever. I mean, people may say that, man, Christianity's under attack right now, but at the same time, I just saw a stat that Bible sales are up 70%, right? Like, this year. Like, so, I mean, there's also a spiritual, I would call it, revival of sorts happening within our youth. They're hungry. Is it in the way that maybe other generations would qualify as authentic or like the good old days? Probably not. It may look a little different, but yeah, I don't know. Things just change so fast. We don't have reference points really anymore. Like, we don't have a decade of one philosophy or one way of speaking or one way of communicating, and then it slowly changes. Like, there's a new platform that's the standard every year.
That is so fascinating. We're going to get way off topic, but it's so fascinating. I made a joke about if the Back to the Future was made today, it would have been 1995.
That's nuts.
When I say the 90s, anyone that lived through the 90s pictures something. They picture Friends and grunge music and whatever. If I say like the 80s or the 70s, all of these decades have something that comes to your mind.
Yes.
Even kind of the aughts or like the early 2000s. When you get into the teens and the last 15 years, I can't classify at all. I have no idea how to classify it.
I mean,
every 2 years it changes.
Callbacks to different decades by month.
Nothing. It's just weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Fall fashion, maybe 70s fashion. Spring fashion, maybe early 2000. Like, we're in the early 2000s now is the big thing. So
is it really?
Yeah.
I'm back.
You're
Ken,
back.
I'm back.
You're in.
I can pull my clothes out of the closet.
Dust them off.
Yeah. So
I know they won't fit me, but
yeah, I don't think we really settled on. I mean, what are the 2020s? I don't even know.
But it is interesting because even from the perspective of, like, if you were to ask a question like, were the 90s quote unquote good for Christians? Or the 70s, like, what was Christianity like in the 70s? Like, there's almost like you can look back and see big movements or shifts and it's like, the last 6 years feel like it feels like the pendulum has gone from like slowly swinging back and forth to just ripping. I don't know.
An interesting thing though is that we also have access to review all of the decades. Like, I feel like in the 70s, you didn't necessarily have, you didn't have YouTube to go on and see, sermons and styles from decades past. Like, we're swimming in all of the different media now from all times. So, I mean, you didn't just live presently in your decade. Like right now, I feel like we're just exploring, but more chaotically.
But
that
I think
makes
what
sense.
you did have, and I didn't live through it, I think what you did have was a general, major, huge, broad stroke paint here. Generally speaking, you had a nation that still sort of said Christian morality is ultimately sort of the right morality. Not that people lived it, people would at least fake it because that was what you're supposed to fake. What you have had a shift in is, well, I don't even accept that Christianity and morality is what I'm supposed to live by. And if you and so that can feel like you're being persecuted.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you no longer share a moral viewpoint with me and you're pushing a different moral viewpoint and you're sort of taking away my ability to sort of keep my moral viewpoint as the guiding light for schools and laws and things can feel like you're taking from me, you're pushing back on me. And sometimes that can, in our heads, it can be like, oh, well, now we're being persecuted. And in some ways, I'm not trying to diminish this, that there might be some kind of truth in some of that. But it's also just, I don't know. It's a weird time to be alive, I guess. And I don't know, since you're so much older than me.
Yeah.
Are you like 4 years old?
Yeah. What were the early 1800s like?
What was the world like when you were a child?
Yeah.
But see, the thing is because I grew up in a very metropolitan area just outside of Philadelphia. I mean, half of my friends were Catholic, the other half were Jewish. I knew one other kid in my high school who would fall into the evangelical Christian camp.
Interesting.
That there may
This was
have been
back
others.
in the 30s.
Yeah,
exactly.
man, way back
but
there.
this is mid to mid 80s. I mean,
Right.
this is and he was the only. There could have been others. He's the only one I knew who had, and he was part of the Assemblies of God Church, which our church did not associate with a whole lot. I mean, it was just like we didn't have a lot of interaction. So I just knew he went to that church. That's all I knew. And so I did not grow up in a highly Christianized outside of my church environment. My cultural environment was not. I mean, my Roman Catholic friends, their faith was something they were born into. Not a lot of them really embraced it in any deep theological way. I mean, we'd have conversations and they wouldn't be able to defend a lot of things that they were taught in their CCD classes. And I knew things they didn't, it's because I grew up in this. Yeah. And so I didn't, it's almost like the world has caught up to how I grew up.
Which is true. It has.
Yeah.
The Midwest is catching up to the coast.
Because I think there's just a level of honesty.
Yeah.
Now, okay, there's also a whole lot of fake that's out there, but there is at least now space that, okay, if I don't claim a faith, I'm not condemned culturally. I kind of grew up with that idea.
Yeah.
I was weird because I did claim a faith. And so, okay, now that's just kind of, I think there's a level of honesty, which is good. That's one of the benefits of a post-Christian era is that it's not automatically assumed, which that's not a bad thing. The bad thing is there's some foundational things that we've lost.
Yeah.
That do have an impact. I remember talking to a friend, the whole question about human sexuality. We were at a conversation back in the early 90s. And I said, the decisions we're making now is a generational effect thing. We will not see the results of this for 40 years. Everything's a wilderness. There's always these 40-year periods. Yeah. And we actually are probably ramping that up. Generationally, we're probably more like 20 years where we see the effect of the things that we're doing. And culturally, there are a lot of people going, I don't know that I buy the Jesus thing, but this is not healthy.
Right.
So what do I do? Because how do I associate with that? So there is an awakening in that. And there are some people that are gravitating back to saying, okay, let me give this Christianity thing another shot or a true shot for the first time. And so I don't know. It's one of those challenges. I think there's a level of when I read the New Testament and I know the church was experiencing persecution on a scale that really only Christians in North Korea and the Middle East and in China are experiencing, or Africa are experiencing right now. But there's a purity that brings to the church,
Yeah.
because if you're going to embrace this, you're embracing the cross side of this a whole lot more than what I grew up with, which was take it or leave it. It's kind of fine. If you're not, you're not.
Yeah, well, it's just lifestyle.
Yeah, it was kind of floating in the orbit of church, as opposed to, no, I'm going to take up my cross, and this culture doesn't incentivize that in any way,
Sure.
quote unquote.
Well, yesterday when I came out of Polycarp and talked about how, isn't it amazing that within 150 years you had the whole Roman Empire convert, which was a testament to the way that they suffered. But we have a lot of literature, as you know, from that period of time. There were a lot of Christians who did not like that the Roman Empire became, if you're not watching, quote unquote, Christian, because all the suffering went away. And I don't know if the church got healthier.
No.
A lot of people would argue that, Constantine, his conversion, even if whether it was real or not, but his movement away and towards Christ had a lot of drawbacks when Christianity became easy and there was no suffering and it became the cool thing to do, it grew a level of fakeness that it was very difficult to know that I can get a good job, to go from I can lose my job to I can get a better job if I'm a Christian, which literally happened.
Yeah.
Changes the very fabric of what it means to follow Jesus. And that's when you have the whole rise of the monastics saying, we're going to go live out in the desert and be real Christians, not and suffer like we're supposed to, even with the fake suffering, just to find it. I think more than anything, and kind of wrap this up, and it's getting long, but where I felt strongly about wanting to communicate through this, both yesterday, we're recording this on Monday, and a few weeks ago after the Charlie Kirk shooting, was number one, there's nothing in me that wants to minimize or diminish anyone's actual pain or suffering. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing in the Bible that diminishes that. Yeah. The Bible doesn't ever say, you're being stupid, suck it up. Sometimes I would like to say that, even to myself. It's like, no, I see. Like again and again in Revelations, Jesus says, I see, I know, I see, I know this, I see this. And he's like, I felt it too. But he's talking to us about how we respond. And it's like, yes, the pain is real. The suffering is real. You're like, I'm not diminishing what you're going through. I do think sometimes we need to really think deeply about whether this is actual persecution or whether we need to rethink what we're going on in our brains. Mm-hmm. But pain is pain. What he's telling us is the world does not get better when you fight back. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I'm very passionate about on a deeper level, which is as a pastor and as a person, wanting Christianity to be more than just this spiritual pie in the sky, do the right thing to get to heaven when you die, and wanting to see it as what I think it is, which is God wanting to redeem and restore earth. And that doesn't happen when his witnesses act like crusaders, right? Yeah. It happens when his witnesses act like Jesus. And for us to want the goodness of God in our lives, and for us to want the goodness of God in our families, and to say, hey, we love our city, we want to see our city change. It doesn't change by us being arrogant jerks always fighting. It happens when they see Jesus in us, and Jesus walked a path of suffering. And so I'd love to even have a whole other conversation just about how we continue to, pastoring through that is hard, because as you know, pastoring through COVID, you're always going to upset somebody who feels like you're being weak or not standing up for what you should stand up for. Yeah. So next week, we're going to take a step into the next church, and I'll just give you an update. Like I want to look at the message to Pergamum. I see something in it. I see a seed or a grain in it that speaks to how do we respond to a culture that feels like it wants to influence us and lead us into it. I don't want people listening to me speak this last Sunday, or you can, to think that suffering and following the cross means you just go ahead and let evil be evil. Mm-hmm. The next 2 Sundays are actually going to talk about No, there are places that we're called to draw the line and stand. And in my own personal life and in our church, we absolutely should be pursuing holiness, and not dealing with sin is a major problem. So those are actually the next 2 weeks. So if you're kind of like unsure, like, is this all wishy-washy? Keep coming back. You're going to see that there's some steel on the other side of the argument too.
I thought your distinction, though, this week was really crucial because, I mean, I love how the Holy Spirit works because literally the day before was the nationwide protests. I mean, if you drove down Battle Creek, down by Target, roads were lined with protests. We were in downtown Chicago for at the time of the protest.
I literally have no idea what you're talking about.
Escaped.
It was a day of protest.
No King's Day.
It was a giant nationwide protest. There were 10,000 people downtown.
This last week was
Chicago,
hard for my family.
Oh, yes. So I love how the Holy Spirit works in that way because your message was extremely
So people probably
relevant.
think I did that on purpose.
Probably.
I didn't.
It was a direct
Sorry.
response.
Great.
No, but our culture does say if you're not screaming over the other side or screaming over what you think is evil, then you're not doing enough,
Then
and
you're
you're
a
laying down and dying.
compromiser. Yeah.
So like even when you made that kind of clarification of like, man, it just looks like Jesus gave up and died. Like, is that what we're supposed to do? You know? But then really walked it through scripturally of like, okay, what does Jesus actually ask us to do in loving him and loving others? And does it involve bulking up and, screaming over our neighbor? Super timely message, and a good reminder. And not only is it a good reminder, but I think in culture, like sometimes the thing that feels the most aggressive seems to be the most honorable, like stepping back. It feels that way.
Well, we live in we just live in that tension.
That's why it's important to have the scriptural reminder.
We want to convert the message is to take up your crown and follow me. And Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me.
Yes.
Or did you preach that yesterday?
I think it may have actually come out during second service. It wasn't in my notes, but as I had
we
that
trust him to do his job?
It's like, well, yeah, we just want certain types of kings.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's culturally. And so there's one side that's happy with a leader and the other side isn't.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's not an anti-king thing. It's just what king do we want? And I'm just like, well, yeah, we have one. And he gave us kind of our orders, and it doesn't quite look like the world.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for this. Appreciate you. Ken, I'm just grateful to have you on the team.
I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Woodland does as well. So thank you for willing to. And thank you as always, Sarah, for making this thing happen.
Yeah.
So
love sitting here.
We'll be back next week talking about Message of Pergamum, as well as kind of what that means for some holding the line on some important cultural issues. So until then, we will see you next week, guys. Thanks.